About 5 years ago in 2021, in the middle of COVID, I packed my bags in the UAE and I moved to Istanbul in Turkey. Before that, I had already lived in 2 other Muslim countries, although I was born in the UK, and then I went on to live for nearly 5 years in Istanbul, Turkey. But there are a few things that I never expected when moving there, and over my years in Turkey, I learned and they solidified in my mind. And whenever somebody would ask me about living there, should they live there, what should I know about living there, these are the things that came to mind. So in this video, I'm going to lay them all out for you so that if you're considering Turkey to live there, doing hijrah there, or if you're just curious about the country, you will learn a lot from this video. So check them out. So the first thing, it's kind of crazy because I left the UAE to move to Turkey thinking that it would be more stable residency-wise. I grew up in the UAE pretty much. My dad worked there and therefore that's why I lived there. But he was always on 1 or 2 year work contracts. So when that contract was running out, we never knew if we would have to leave or not. And this continued for 16 years of my life. I even went to uni like this, not knowing how much longer I would be able to stay. In the end, I lived a total of about 19, 20 years in the UAE before leaving in 2021. But I went to Turkey hoping and thinking that I would be able to get some sort of long-term residency or even citizenship. And it was one of the only countries that I heard where you could actually have a chance of getting citizenship or some sort of long-term residency. I'm talking about 5, 10 years residency. The ironic thing is that when I went to Turkey about a year after, in April 2022, they shut down a lot of options when it comes to residency. And I happened to already be there, and that's why I was able to stay. But guess what? I was on a year-by-year residency that I had to renew every year. And then just before I left, it became you had to renew it every 6 months. Whereas in the UAE, they were going in the opposite direction. So while I left the UAE and moved to Turkey, in the UAE, they started rolling out more long-term residency permits. No citizenship, of course, but there are options now to get 5 years and 10-year residency permits. Of course, it's tied to investing quite a bit of money, but not an impossible amount of money. I actually have a friend who has a 10-year golden visa over there, so it's definitely possible. But yes, one thing I didn't realize going to Turkey is that you should not expect to have stability there. The best options in 2025 for living in Turkey are basically investing $400,000 to get the citizenship, and then you're basically sorted, right? The other options, if you don't have that much money or you don't want to spend that much money on getting a citizenship, is becoming a student, which only lasts for 3 years, 4 years, getting a job there, which is very hard to come by, but even then, your living there is tied to your job, you know? And then the other option is to buy a property and have the residency permit from your property. Even that, because of just the way the immigration system works there, I've heard of people who have bought properties and they've still had issues with getting residency permits. So this is something I didn't know. If you're gonna move to Turkey in 2025, 2026, personally, you just have to be prepared for this side of things. Just be comfortable like I was, marinating in uncertainty, instability. But really the main move for Turkey is to just get the citizenship and get it over and done with, really. That's the only way. The other thing that I didn't realize about Turkey is that it's a very special culture. It's a very different culture to the Arab world or even to Europe. It's an isolated culture. It's a country that was kind of cut off from the world, cut off from the Ummah since the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate. And so Turks as a society, as a people, have been cut off from the world. They've been cut off from the Arabs just because, I don't know, but I think they've been told those are the bad guys, don't mix with them. There was obviously an effort to cut them off from the Ummah and not let them associate with other people based on being Muslim. And even their language cuts them off from the world. A lot of them don't know English or Arabic or anything like that. And also a lot of them don't leave the country, they don't travel. Their country is quite big, quite spacious. There are a lot of places to go. Like if you want to go on holiday, there are plenty of places. And also until very recently, it was a poorer country. It was a less developed country. So they didn't have the means, a lot of them, to leave the country. You go there, there is a monoculture, right? There's a culture which is the Turkish culture. And if you are not like that, you're going to stand out quite a lot. You're going to be quite different. Even just language-wise, they just do not speak other languages, right? The new generation, a lot of them are learning English here and there. but a lot of them, they do not speak English or Arabic or any of these languages. So you just have to know that when you're going there, you know. And also it lets you empathize as well. When you know that they've been kind of cut off from the world, it allows you to understand where they're coming from. I learned this very quickly when going there, but it would have been nice to know that from the get-go, that the Turkish people, they're very proud people, and they're just they have a very specific culture. They have a certain way that they do things, and it's probably going to be different to the European, the Arab, etc. way of doing things. That's how they are, and that's because of their history. The other thing which I benefited from massively in Turkey, and it probably would have caused me to move there even earlier or whatever, is the amount of scholars, the amount of activists that are living in that country. It's one of the main countries that people who are active politically or in religious affairs in their country, a lot of them in the Arab world, when they have to leave their country because they're not safe basically, a lot of them have gone to Turkey. And so what you'll find is that those people are there, they're teaching, they're doing da'wah, they're doing their activism from Turkey. And that gives the whole place a feeling, right? A flavor. And a lot of people like that flavor. Some people don't like that flavor. But this influences a lot. And it means there are institutes there where you can study Islam that you would never find in the rest of the Muslim world, especially the Arab world. It just would not be allowed. And so apart from talking about Turkish issues and Turkey and stuff like that, apart from that, everything else is pretty much open to be talked about and it's allowed. And so you kind of get access to more unfiltered teachings of Islam, right? In many countries in the Arab world, the people are allowed to teach, 60% of the religion, 70%, whatever. But there's always that chunk that is just not allowed to be talked about, including in the West, of course. But in Turkey, I found that everything pretty much was allowed to be talked about, except for Turkish issues, Turkish internal politics issues, etc., stuff like that. And I'll tell you something, to be honest with you, that was very refreshing and it was very useful. And, I don't think we can downplay this factor. Like whenever you're picking a country to live in, think about what is the freedom to learn the full Islam, A to Z. Because you might say, yeah, we can learn about everything in Islam in XYZ country, except this, whatever that thing is. We can't talk about this thing. But that thing, although it might be 3% of the religion, just to put a number on it, it might actually be very heavy. It might be something very, very heavy on the scales. And so it's something important to consider when moving to any country. The other thing that I didn't realize is the importance of learning the language, like from day one. Alhamdulillah, I'm somebody who seems to pick up languages pretty easily. But with Turkish, I never fully learned it, let's be honest. I never fully learned it. I picked up a lot of words. Amongst my friends, I was one of them that could speak the most Turkish, understand the most Turkish. And to be honest with you, how did I learn it? I learned it from being forced to learn it when buying, selling, etc. But also, I learned it from reading labels, reading labels online, reading packaging in the shop. So I learned a lot of Turkish just like from that. Like I would never go into an administrative building or a business and ask them if they speak English, right? I would never do that. I would always just go Google Translate, look at the main word or words that I need, and I would try and use that. And I think over time in doing that, I learned more Turkish than a lot of my friends, a lot of people that I know. Some people, imagine, they have this thing where they're living in Turkey, but they're like, I'll never learn the language. It was like some stubbornness that they developed because I guess Turks are very, they very much want you to learn Turkish and speak in Turkish, and therefore some people rebelled against that. But yes, learning the language is very important. If I knew I was going to live there for 5 years nearly, I definitely probably would have invested in learning the language in that first year. Instead, I just slowly picked up stuff over time. And by the time I was leaving, I hadn't really grasped it, where, for example, just a little example, I get a phone call about a delivery, about my telephone bill, whatever it is, that would always give me anxiety, just not being able to fully understand what they're saying and respond back. Some things would work, be okay, but not everything. And then finally, I would say the biggest thing I didn't realize, I knew Turkey was developed, but I didn't know to what level, right? And I'm talking about Istanbul here because I lived in Istanbul and I lived in one of the newer, more modern kind of suburbs of Istanbul. But Istanbul, and I want to say Turkey in general, it's very developed, right? In some ways, it's more developed than the UK. In some ways, it's more developed than the UAE even. And I just really appreciated that. Not in terms of the malls and that stuff. Honestly, I've had my full of malls after living in the UAE for 19 years. What I appreciated was the public transport is very good. In 4.5 years of living in Turkey, I only had a car for one of those years in the last year that I was there. Before that, I was actually able to comfortably live with just public transport, bit of taxis here and there. It was actually fine. And that's probably because of the design of the neighborhood I was living in as well. It was very well designed. And that means I could have walked a lot of places. I did a lot of walking in those years and it was really good. And even with one child and then two and then eventually three, it was only when the third child came along that we really felt the need for a car. But before that, we were doing great. Very soon they're opening a metro from that neighborhood straight to the airport. We live 30 minutes drive from the airport. So the infrastructure is amazing. It's very developed. There are a lot of apps and stuff for everything. And what I loved a lot is nature and parks. Like greenery is part of development is having greenery in cities. And Istanbul does that very well. There are so many different parks in Istanbul. And what you'll find a lot of the time is the park is like free to get into, of course, but there'll be a government parking thing right next to it. You just pay like 100 liras, which is like £2. Maybe it's gone up now to £3 or whatever. And you'll park your car there and you'll be in this very well-maintained, clean park, right? Same with like barbecue areas, same with forests, same with mountains. There's so much nature that is accessible to you. You know, in some countries there is nature, but it's not always accessible. Sometimes there's no defined trails. Sometimes there'll be no bathrooms or whatever in the area. But Turkey does very good in that. So it's very developed in all different ways, I would say. And so if you're considering living in Turkey or you're just thinking about doing hijrah, living in another country, these are some things that will help you, whether you're thinking of Turkey or another country. I think all of these things are good to reflect upon. If you're interested in the journey of hijrah, you're either living in a Muslim country right now or you're thinking of making the jump, then check out this channel. It's all about that. So you might want to subscribe.